Hello, beautiful people. Today we're going to talk about activated charcoal. Activated charcoal is something we see patients on a lot, especially if they've had mold damage or Lyme disease and they want to detoxify. Activated charcoal is used in everything from toothpaste to smoothies, and people are saying it is either a miracle substance or complete pseudoscience and quackery. So, Bree and Brehan, what do you notice when you see a patient who is on activated charcoal? What's the first thing that runs through your mind?
First thing that I think of is the effects on the digestive system of the patient, because it's so important for people who have any kind of toxic overload to be eliminating regularly. We've talked about all the different detox pathways that we want to keep open, and this tends to constipate people.
How about you, Bree?
So it definitely does have an effect because it's constipating people, and we definitely know that as an effect. But then another thing that we don't notice is that it makes people pretty irritable because they're constipated on top of that. So, on top of having all the issues that come with mold, they're also constipated and irritable.
Yeah, fair enough. When you see patients who have been taking it, do you find that it is helpful for detoxifying them when it comes to diseases which we tend to associate with fungi or mold, these kind of diseases which like a lot of moisture and like a lot of surface area?
Bree, you want to take that one first?
You talking to me?
No, the other Bree.
Which Bree? Because we've got a few going at the moment.
Yeah.
Me Bree. Okay. Look, I do think it does help to a certain degree, but if we do look at the evidence as to whether or not it's in the right, if we're looking at like just the steps of the process, then maybe it's not complete. Like you have to use it in conjunction with other stuff. You can't just be like, activated charcoal is going to clear me out, and it's just it's the detox pathway. We use it a lot for poisons, for example. So we do know that in the medical community, in the health industry, what we do know about activated charcoal is that it's quite porous, and so the porousness of the charcoal does have a clearing effect in terms of being able to bind these poisons or these funguses or bacteria, and that's why it's used on teeth as well. So it does take off a layer of the teeth because it binds. But in saying that, it's also taking a lot of the good stuff as well. So it's not just taking the bad stuff, but it's taking the good stuff through the system and clearing that through. So
it's just generally clearing away. So one of the important aspects to remember is the way that it works is that it's incredibly porous, and there's absorption wherein your body takes something in, and then there's adsorption where the substance goes through and it takes something out of you like a sponge. What they've noticed is if you drink some orange juice and then you have the activated charcoal, you're basically removing the orange juice. That's what happens. There are people saying, well, it will, detoxify at a deeper level. Not really. Look, it's a sponge. It's going to take up whatever's there, right? And then with the binding effect in terms of limiting bowel movements, if you have a microbiome in the lower colon that is very hot and damp and has all kinds of nasties in it, what you've essentially done when you take activated charcoal and it slows the bowel movements is you've given it space to incubate. So if you can think of it like plant nurseries, all of the little plants start off in the little containers and then they move into larger and larger containers. Mm-hmm. By having something with all of this surface area, ideally, if the bowels are clean, they're moving very quickly, sure, it's going to take whatever's there on the way out. The downside is that it can create area for these little critters to grow. And you mentioned the teeth as well. The particles of the charcoal are really serving to kind of sand the teeth. And we see the same thing in the intestines. So intestines that have lesions, which happens when people have chronic diseases, it can in a way be sanding those intestinal lesions, potentially making them worse. So, yes, activated charcoal is useful. I can see a lot of research from the 1930s on of it being used with particular poisons. Like someone's actively just taken a poison, right? And then they've ingested a bunch of poison. Then they take the activated charcoal, and then maybe they're only brain damaged instead of dying, right?
Yeah, I think of this as like you're ingesting a Berkey water filter. You guys know what the Berkey is?
Yeah.
So, yeah, do you have these, Bree, in Australia? It's like it's the one all the end of the world preppers love to use here, because you can pour like lake water through it in the top, and it's just a simple gravity filter. Yeah. And you can drink what comes out the bottom, and it's just a charcoal filter, or it's like 3 of them that you put in this thing. And so it's really good to, like Andrew was saying, like it leaches everything out of the water, and what you end up with is clean. But if you're, if you're exposed to something acute, like a poison, or like where I first learned of this was for, like food poisoning, like you go eat at a buffet, or maybe you go to like, some kind of picnic on a hot summer day, and you dip into the potato salad after it's been sitting out too long. You can use the activated charcoal, and it will like soak up the infectious critters or whatever toxicity you just absorbed. But you will also, you take it for a long time, and most of our patients with chronic mold exposure, or with, chronic pesticide residue or whatever it is, they're, with the chronic situation, one, you got to make sure that stuff is in your digestive tract also. So like if your mold exposure, if your fungus is all affecting your nervous system, it's probably affecting your digestive system as well, but you're not necessarily going to be pulling things from here over to here, from one to the other. Mm-hmm. And then 2, if you're going to be taking it for a very long time, as because this is not an overnight process to get anything out of your body when you've been exposed to it for years, or it's affected you chronically, you're going to be losing a lot of the good with the bad.
So similar to like a colonic or something like that. You're just going to lose it regardless, because unless you're putting something back. It's
like you're drinking distilled water all the time. Mm-hmm. Like it's gonna pull more minerals out of your body. Yeah,
it's pulling out vitamins, it's pulling out minerals. So it's not an essential good. So it's intuitive, right? You think of it, this cleanses water. I'm made up of water. This is going to work out for me. But that's also true of sand, right? Sand also does that. But that doesn't mean that we should be brushing our teeth with sand or eating loads of sand. Maybe there's a time and place for it, right? Like clay is another one. We've seen in traditional Chinese medicine uses that, right? There's clay that you eat.
Like bentonite clay.
Right. Something similar to that. I've only seen ancient books that talk about, digging up a certain clay from a region and then eating that with acute poison. But it's not like eating that clay on a daily basis is going to have a purifying effect on the blood. This is for very acute cases. Yeah. And then same thing with charcoal. Charcoal is used in a lot of herbal medical traditions to reduce blood circulation. And so when we're taking activated charcoal, we've got to look at that effect of it slowing blood circulation. So if there's a pathogen in the body that's being spread by way of blood circulation, I can see how taking a bit of charcoal, even if it's in the bloodstream, could make them feel better, because by slowing the blood circulation, you're going to slow the pathogen spread. However, you're also kind of killing yourself because you're not getting that blood circulation that you need.
Andrew, I think maybe for our listeners who don't understand some of the traditional use of charcoals or carbonized herbs, we could probably explain here a little bit that, mm-hmm. By slowing the blood circulation down, it doesn't mean you're like, gunking up their arteries with cotton or balls or something like that. It's sort of like if you have internal bleeding somewhere, like you can use this to kind of, help the clotting process in that area. Mm-hmm. And use those carbonized herbs to affect that bleeding. That's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, it's to slow the bleeding, right? Yeah.
A lot of the times it's used for like metrorrhagia. So a lot of gynecology issues mm-hmm. Use what we call the tan. Mm-hmm. So like aye tan or zi tan.
Huang tan, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just processed. It's just the herbs processed until they're charcoal, more or less.
But this is kind of the opposite strategy that you would use if somebody has been exposed to mold and then all of a sudden they found themselves ill and it's happened over a long period of time and they have these symptoms of water retention. This is going to be at the opposite spectrum of what I would use. How about you guys?
Yeah, very much so.
So one of the things when I see a patient, they've come in, they've got mold exposure, and they say, well, I'm on all these vitamins and I'm on activated charcoal. I take these all at the same time. First thing I'm thinking is, oh God, instead of this being a 3-month course of treatment, if they don't stop with this nonsense, this is going to take 4 or 5 months. And I think this is what happens. People say, oh, I've been a victim of mold and mold toxins for 8 years. But honestly, I think a lot of the natural health treatments are keeping them in a prolonged state of sickness.
Yeah,
It might feel better for a little time, and then afterwards, it's not doing them any favors long term.
Yeah. It's one of those temporary effect situations, and these are things that that they're often coming from a fairly I don't know if juvenile is the right word to use, but it's not a complete understanding of how they work, which is probably why you get the short-term benefit, but not the long-term.
It's intuitive, but it is a bit naive. I mean, you think, because you do need to look big picture, right? Okay, if something absorbs, is what you use to clean water with, it makes sense that that's going to have an effect on the body. And indeed it does in very specific circumstances, right? But it's not the truth across the board. It's not the truth for all types of toxicity. And you find that, I mean, if you look in Google Scholar, you'll see activated charcoal study in the 70s in Nigeria or Southeast Asia saying this really doesn't work for this particular type of toxicity in this population. And another, maybe it works just fine. And it just has to do with when you're ingesting a poison, there's rate of absorption. There's so many factors, how viscous it is. There's just so many variables as to whether or not activated charcoal or bentonite clay will be a good option for you. And that's, they also say don't vomit, call poison control. There's a reason for that. There's a reason they don't just say, oh, just keep some activated charcoal. Oh, did your kid drink a gallon of gasoline? Whatever, just, take the activated charcoal. You're good. You're not good. You're going to die. Right. So it's the same thing especially with chronic diseases that are of an infectious nature. It's just like you're not going to detox a virus out of your body, like an acute virus. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. No, it doesn't work.
They were putting it into ice cream, weren't they?
Yeah. And,
just because it makes it look cool.
Well, and
it does kind of look cool.
And aside from the irritation, if it's true that by eating charcoal with another substance, you're helping to remove it from the body, it's really kind of like some sort of bulimia when you think about it. Right?
So we need more charcoal flavored desserts as like a weight loss gimmick, right? Like that's like what do they call that fat that you can't absorb that they tried to use in potato chips, but it gave everybody the runs? Olestra or something like that?
Yeah, it's kind of the same idea, right? I mean, personally, I think like if I eat ice cream, I'll just have something with a lot of fiber, which will create a little bit of a slow release mechanism, or something that's warming to digestion. So I have the metabolism to use it. I think these approaches are a little more intelligent, and here's the other thing. You could also cut your ice cream by eating it with clay or sand.
Totally.
It's like the king of biohacking right now. This is
right.
what we're talking about.
Well, and I'm not suggesting this. I'm saying this facetiously because Jesus Christ, what are you doing? Right. You shouldn't be eating charcoal. Right. Aside from all else, do we even know how carcinogenic it is? You're not even supposed to eat burnt chicken because it's a carcinogen.
True. That's true. You're basically swallowing charcoal briquettes.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, there are probably no long-term studies on effects of eating charcoal because who the hell was doing that recreationally until recently?
That is like the most heavily oxidized thing you can do is take something that's been literally burned so much that it is nothing left but carbon.
Yeah, so I think it's questionable health practice at best. There are certainly, I don't want to say it's completely pseudoscience, completely bunk, because clearly there are effective uses for it. But the way that it's being used conventionally, as a healthcare professional, when I see people come in and they are doing this, it's like, somebody has a hurt knee, and every 5 minutes they take a little ball peen hammer and bang themselves in the knee. I can't stop it from hurting. I can't help you either. Jesus Christ, stop it. So look, I say this with love, but if you're trying to get rid of toxicity from mold, something fungal in nature, something chronic, and you're using something like activated charcoal, you're going to unfortunately have an uphill battle. And I don't think it's one that you're going to win. God, that sounded bleak. I mean, you're not going to win until you change strategies.
There are other methods that people can use to get this stuff out of their body.
Definitely. And there are routes of elimination for mycotoxins. And if you look at the studies on the routes of elimination for mycotoxins, one of them is having healthy gut microbiota. And if you have something that's binding and causing constipation, you just eliminated one of the 5 main routes of elimination for mycotoxins in the body. Another one is having a well-regulated inflammatory system, that sweet spot of inflammation. And once again, you're messing with that. If you're messing with clotting, you're going to be affecting prostaglandins in the body. You're going to be affecting that sweet spot of inflammation. Is it going to be bumping it in the right direction or wrong direction? You're not going to know. But as something that's that much of an oxidant, probably not the right direction.
I think touching on the microbiome is key. Because Bree, a week ago or so, you posted a study in your belly fat group on the role that the human microbiome plays in as protective against mycotoxins. And there was that, so like you're saying, Andrew, anything that affects that microbiome in a negative way, which is moving it one direction or the other away from homeostasis, is probably going to be the opposite of protected from this. And something that has a constipating nature, certainly not helpful in terms of keeping the microbiome healthy, because a big part of that process is regular elimination.
Mm-hmm.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, Brian, particularly just hitting on that point of taking it away from homeostasis. It's such an extreme therapy that, people are going to feel better initially on it. And that's one thing we want to highlight in terms of, you're going to feel initially better, but it's doing so much more long-term damage that you don't even know because it is carcinogenic. And on top of that, adding the word activated doesn't make it healthier. In our sphere, right? We've got right. People who, you get like activated almonds, and all of a sudden it's got this magical property or something, and it's kind of bullshit.
I think don't they mean activated in this case? I think it's like a process they use to make more pores on the charcoal. So it's like,
right.
It's
but it doesn't make it any less carcinogenic. Right?
Oh no, certainly,
right.
Maybe more.
It's still the substance, exactly, because you've got more surface area for it to be touching.
No, but it's just it's the idea of you've got your like wellness warriors and your health advocates, and they're like it's activated, and it's like so
it's a higher vibrational process.
Like so what?
It is meaningless in that sense, absolutely. So, what would you advocate instead of charcoal? Somebody's come in, they are wanting to deal with some of the mycotoxins. Now, I'm not talking about a specific substance. So personally, one of the first things I ask them is, are they able to break a sweat? And oftentimes the answer is no. And if they can't, it doesn't matter what tool that I'm using, whether it's a sauna, whatever it is, the first thing I try to do is get them to break a sweat.
Yeah.
You query them on their elimination processes. So, if you've got an orifice, there's elimination happening with those particular orifices, which we obviously love talking about in our previous videos. So urination, bowel movements, you're looking at saliva production, probably biofilms on the tongue. So when I say biofilms, we're looking at the tongue coating. All of those are quite accessible and quite objective assessors as to what's happening in the body and whether or not they're processing things correctly.